When I answered my landline and John said, "Yes, I'd love to speak to Golden Gate Breakfast Club," I thought I won the lottery. And you can call John Rothman many things. Among them, KGO radio host, 4 to 7 slot. I listened last night. And it's political analyst. And you could call him podcaster, author, teacher, professor at USF's Fromm School, and a native son of San Francisco. And I'm not sure, John, if it's fourth, fifth, or sixth generation, but you all been here, the Mashpaka's been here a long time. John, as we all know, and some of you who are new will learn, is outspoken, brilliant, electrifying, illuminating, candid, thought-provoking, and personally my favorite, he's funny. John is a historian and a humanitarian. For the new members from across the country and across the pond, John is not only a local treasure in San Francisco, he's a national treasure and teacher. He has spoken at 150 universities and colleges through the US, Canada, and Israel. He's an in-demand speaker, and he is nationally known as a library. You didn't mishear me. I didn't say librarian. He is a library. He owns 15,000 volumes that academicians, researchers, PhD candidates, and authors come from all over the country to borrow and to get their information for their works. John knows politics, not only from both sides of the aisle, but when that aisle is a maze, he is amazing. As far as being a humanitarian, some of you don't know that in the 70s and 80s, San Francisco Jewish community worked very hard to free the Soviet Jews so they could leave to practice the faith. And I found a picture of John from those days in our local J. John was active when he was a young man, because the thing that we know about John is that he does good things for other people. We call that tikkun olam. John repairs the world. So we are in for an education, a wild ride, and a real treat. So join me in welcoming our longtime friend of GGBC, one of my first interviewers, John Rothman.
Susan, I'm going to take you with me everywhere because that was such a splendid, modest introduction. By the way, Susan, how's my hair? Good. Okay. I want to say, President Tony, how delighted I am to be with you. And I want to acknowledge this is the first time I've had an opportunity to be with the Breakfast Clubbers since the death of Ray Scioto. And I just want to remember Ray today because when I would come in to speak, he would always greet me so warmly. And I think it's appropriate to remember those who are no longer with us. Okay, I know I have a brief amount of time, and I know many of you have questions and comments, so let me begin. Let me start with Ukraine and tell you it's going to go from bad to worse. There is no good news in Ukraine. One of the big issues that everyone has to realize is whatever aid we give them, the question is how do we get it to them? And that is why there is a real concern now about the Russian offensive. Remember, May 9th is coming, which is the anniversary of the victory in the Great War, World War II. And we don't know really what Putin has planned, but it's not good for Ukraine. I don't have an answer for you. I don't think negotiations are going to work. There are too many deaths, too much bitterness, too much anger. Quick word about Zelensky, a man who was a comedian. And for those of you who think you're funny, who knows, you too could be president one day. And the one thing you can say about Zelensky is he has really scored. He has really intrigued, captivated, and spoken for the world and for his people. So let me put aside that particular problem, although we are going to deal with it a lot in the future. Let me deal with the United States Supreme Court. Of course, as a radio talk show host, and yes, you all know I'm on from 4 to 7, Monday through Friday on KGO. It's a remarkable moment. I was on the air just 2 days ago, about a little after 6 o'clock when the word came of the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and Politico and all the rest talking about what had happened. So whether you are on one side or the other on the question of a woman's right to choose, or pro-life if you prefer, the most important single thing to know is that if this decision comes down from the Supreme Court, as is expected, with at least a 5-4 majority, we will see a revolution in this country, the likes of which we have not seen since the Civil War. I'm excluding Brown versus the Board of Education, although many of you will recall the Southern Manifesto, which was issued in 1956 by Southern congressmen and senators who opposed Brown versus the Board of Education and who opposed the integration of schools. They did it on the basis of states' rights. I want simply to try to summarize it this way. I don't want to talk about whether you're for or against abortion. I want to talk about a question that Abraham Lincoln raised and which Stephen A. Douglas raised in their Senate campaign of 1858, popular sovereignty. There was a great debate in advance of the Civil War over the question of whether or not slavery could be resolved as each state resolved for itself what it would do. It was Stephen A. Douglas and Lewis Cass, by the way, both of whom are the nominees of the Democratic Party for president, who suggested to the nation that let every state, let every territory decide for itself what it will do. And it was Abraham Lincoln who responded with the simple phrase, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." I want to emphasize to you that we are a house divided against itself. And it has to do with partisan issues, Democrats and Republicans. It has to do with religious issues, those who favor the right of women to choose, those who call themselves pro-life. There are many ramifications. What will the implication be in American politics? Well, the first thing you have to know is if, and I believe it's pretty well set now, if the Supreme Court does act as it appears to act, we will see ramifications in November. Everybody asks me who will win the election. The answer is it depends on the indignation of the American people. Who will be more motivated to get out and vote? And remember, the right and the left both have reasons to vote. The Republican Party has built its political future on the question of opposing a woman's right to choose. Once upon a time, the Republican Party was a very different political party. I remember when Gerald Ford and Betty Ford championed the right of a woman's right to choose. That Republican Party is gone. And we now know that when Donald Trump ran for president, he made clear that if he were elected president, he was going to put justices on the United States Supreme Court who would reverse Roe v. Wade. The greatest single accomplishment of the Trump administration is that Donald Trump succeeded in that effort. And if you wonder about the results in Ohio last night, that's part of the reason that J.D. Vance is going to be the Republican nominee for the United States Senate. And if you believe the polls will all, in all likelihood, win that Senate seat. I say this because I want you to understand, we are going to see a vigorous debate. We're going to see protests in the street. We are going to see Americans fighting Americans. Physically, in fact, I think is almost inevitable. So I believe this is the most passionate time. And it goes back, in a sense, to a whole other question. You will note that the Republican Party, the leadership of Mitch McConnell, did not address the substance of what the court might do, rather attacked the leaker. And the issue became the leaker rather than the substance. And I must tell you very respectfully, no matter what side you're on, everyone should condemn the fact that that preliminary decision by Sam Alito was leaked. One of the things that has made the court so particularly unique is that there have never been these kinds of leaks, unless you want to go back to James Buchanan, who in his inaugural address on March the 4th, 1857, leaked in his own way the Dred Scott decision. I say this because we need to understand that there are two views here. Rather than attacking the issue frontally, the decision to go after the leaker, who will be found, I want to move away from this and talk about the other major American issue, which we will see on our televisions in full drama, beginning on June the 9th. And that is the January 6th committee report. Again, your partisan view is a little concern to me here. If we were on the radio, it might be, but with me just talking, well, it's up to you. But I can tell you, and I'm told by people involved in the January 6th committee, that what will be revealed will shock the American people, that it will be very disturbing. Now, here's the question you have to ask. Do facts matter? And I'm going to suggest to you that we are so polarized but facts really don't matter. I say this with a deep sense of regret. When I listened to Kevin McCarthy's recordings, and remember, and all of you know, I worked for Richard Nixon. I was on the president's staff for many years, and I can tell you that one of the most interesting aspects is that Richard Nixon would never have been removed from the presidency had those tapes not revealed what they revealed. Remember, the inclination of the American people was to believe the president, and only when the tapes were revealed and the president's actual words became, well, frankly, the very words that hung him. Richard Nixon said in the David Frost interviews that he impeached himself, and that's true. So the question will be whether or not, as we progress, whether or not the words of a Kevin McCarthy or the words of a Donald Trump or the memos that were issued will have any impact on the American people. So let me put on my hat as a talk show host on KGO and say very simply, everything in me wants to believe that the American people will respond to truth. But I've come to the conclusion that the sides are so clearly drawn that even in the face of fact, well, be honest with you, it appears now that facts don't matter. Now wait, let's be clear. No matter which side of the Donald Trump question you're on, or on the question of the Supreme Court, whatever you believe, the one question we have to ask is, if you speak truth to the American people, and can the American people admit that perhaps their judgment was right, or perhaps that their judgment was wrong? I think the most critical facet is that when you really believe that what you have said is true, it's hard to then go back and say it isn't. Let me just tell you a quick story. I was down at the Nixon Library, and when I go down there, I don't announce who I am. They know me. I go through, but I was in the Watergate Gallery, and a docent who is a retired high school teacher, and by the way, a brilliant docent, saw me there and he said, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, we're so lucky. We have John Rothman with us." John worked for the president, and he's going to tell you the truth about Watergate. He's going to tell you Nixon was railroaded out of office. Well, instead of making a talk, I played what Richard Nixon said in his conversation with Bob Haldeman on June 23rd, 1972. And then I played Richard Nixon's own words in the interview with David Frost, in which he said, as I just mentioned, he impeached himself. I said, it isn't my judgment. It is, in fact, what actually happened that matters. So on these two great questions, the Supreme Court and the question of the the January 6th committee, it'll depend very much on where the American people come down. I want to shift if I can, and I know I've got limited time. Somebody give me a time sign, will you? President Tony, perhaps you can do that. I want to say a few words about some local issues. Many of you know that I have been the president of the George Washington High School Alumni Association for 49 years. I've agreed to stick around for 2 more. I'm going to retire at 50 years. But one of the most important things we've learned, it was the mural issue, question of the George Washington High School murals, the Arnatoff murals, and they're being erased, which provoked the initial response to the school board. And you know that on top of that, the renaming process, the decision to rename 44 schools in San Francisco, including Washington, Lincoln, et cetera. And then the decision on Lowell to change the admissions procedure in Lowell. It provoked a backlash here in the city. And as you may know, 3 commissioners of the Board of Education, all were overwhelmingly removed from office in a recall. I say this to you because I have faith that when the American people or the people of San Francisco are presented with facts, it will make a difference. We have another major issue coming up in June, and the question of the recall of the district attorney of San Francisco. This is going to be another major battle, and we will see how the people of this city vote. I just want to remind you that San Francisco is pigeonholed as a Democratic stronghold, a progressive city, if you will. And yet there was no reluctance on the part of the people of San Francisco to respond vigorously on the issue of the Board of Education. And I have a feeling you're going to see the same kind of response with the district attorney. Let me just conclude and then take your questions by saying this. My job, I teach, it's true, I write books, it's true, I do all those things. But the thing that I enjoy most is having the opportunity to be on KGO. I am on from 4 to 7, Monday through Friday. By the way, I'm taking off tonight. My wife has something she needs me to do, so I'm going to be off tonight. But many of you know I am there, and I have wide listening audience. I average about 30 calls a program in the 3 hours I'm on. I get a lot of criticism, but a lot of support. And that's part of being part of the public role that I play. And I must say to you, I enjoy it immensely. In fact, I know this is really all between us. If you promise not to tell them, I would pay them to let me come in and do my radio show. Anyway, there are many things I could talk about. I know that. I just try to give you a quick taste. Let me stop now. I'll take whatever questions you have. And President Tony, you're in charge of the time. So you tell me when I'm on or off.
All right. Thank you, John. I appreciate your comments. And you have until you decide you want to leave, or 9 a.m. whenever we close the door. I'm going to have to leave at 8:30 myself, unfortunately, for another meeting.
But how will you pass the test at the end of the program? All right.
I luckily have it recorded, so
that's what I like, an answer for everything. No wonder you're president. All right.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to put everybody, take you off of spotlight so you can see everybody and everybody can see each other, and take it away.
I have a question for John, if I might, President Tony.
All right.
Since you ended with the Chesa Boudin story, I would like to ask about that. A judge that we all know very well has said to me on several occasions, we don't have a DA and a public defender in San Francisco. We have two public defenders. So, John, my question to you is, do you think that the fact that Chesa Boudin's parents were incarcerated for starting when he was, 14 months old, that has impacted or made him not able to understand what a district attorney is all about? And what is your projection as to whether the city of St. Francis will recall the man?
All right. First of all, we're all influenced by the things we experience. Chesa Boudin's mother died this week. I'm sure it was a great blow to him, as it would be for any of us if a parent passes away. I've known every district attorney of San Francisco since Tom Lynch, so I go way back. Each one of them, and I'll use Terrence Hallinan for a moment, who was certainly influenced by his father and his mother and their activities as well. I happen to believe that in the end, he will be recalled. I think he has not been an effective salesman for his position or for the positions he advocates for or against. It takes a lot, and San Francisco is not notoriously well known for recalling people, but there is a certain anger, and it's not left versus right. It is what is correct in terms of San Francisco. Let me just pause and say, yes, I expect him to be recalled. And by the way, I've invited him to be on my program repeatedly. He never accepts. I did have two people from the district attorney's office who came in and explained the case against Chesa Boudin. And tomorrow I will have the Susan Dyer Reynolds on, and she has taken a very strong stand against him. But I welcome people who support him as well, because we need to hear both sides. Let me remind everybody the power of the mayor of San Francisco. And I really want everyone to understand this clearly and precisely. Not only has the Mayor London Breed, appointed 3 commissioners to the Board of Education, but she will then have the power to appoint the district attorney if Chesa Boudin is recalled. The question of our own mayor and who is mayor is very important and should not be underestimated. So I'm only pointing that out because there are a lot of questions that have been raised, and we have to deal with all of those. But my expectation is he will be recalled. I'll even stick my neck out and say with at least 60% in favor of recall, and then it will be on the mayor to make the decision about who the next district attorney will be. Quickly, you should know that in November, whoever is appointed will have to stand in November as well. So we'll have a quick opportunity to turn around on that. And the 3 school board members who have been put on as commissioners, they too will have to stand in November on an up-down vote.
Thank you, sir.
Alan Garber, you were raising earlier, so go ahead. Followed by Otto Randolph there.
Hi, John. Nice to see you again.
My pleasure.
Welcome back. I have one question and one comment. The question is the topic that you did not raise, and it's President Biden's cognitive ability and whether or not you think he's going to survive 4 years in the presidency, if he'll be either 25th Amendment or impeached for something that has to do with Hunter Biden. And in the event that he does not finish his term, what's your opinion of Kamala Harris's ability to take on that role? My comment is, you were talking earlier about facts, and we've noticed in the last 4 to 8 years that we don't always know what the facts are. The press has been very biased on a lot of things. For years, they told us that President Trump was a Russian agent, and we had all this Russian collusion stuff that's been totally debunked, and other things like that. So people don't really always know what the quote facts are. So I'd like you to comment on that too.
First of all, it depends who you listen to. I try to listen to everything, and I listen to Fox, and I listen to CNN, and I listen to MSNBC, and I read all the various national publications. In the end, people have to make a decision about what they believe is true, and finding truth from the media is not easy. In the old days, I would have told you that if you watched CBS, you got a liberal perspective. If you watched ABC, you got a more conservative perspective. And if you watched NBC, it was sort of in the middle. Those days are gone.
Right.
So one of the things, just so you're aware of this, that I try to do on my talk show, and one of the reasons I believe I'm popular, is I have everything represented. Now, you asked about Joe Biden's cognitive ability. I am not a doctor. I'm not in a position to analyze in that way. I can tell you that Joe Biden, I've known Joe Biden, as many of you know, since the 1970s. He's not the same man that he was when I first met him back in about 1974, 75. Joe Biden is fully capable and competent to be president of the United States. In order to have an impeachment, you have to have the votes. And you will note with Donald Trump, even if there were, as a result of January 6th in particular, compelling reasons to be disturbed about Donald Trump, the votes were not there. We have never had a president convicted. Richard Nixon would have been, but he chose to resign. Now, your question about Kamala Harris. I believe Kamala came to the Breakfast Club on a number of occasions, and I believe most of us in this room know her. Is she able to be president? Well, let's see. She's over 35 years old. She is the vice president of the United States, and that's all that really matters constitutionally. Now, if I'd asked you about Harry Truman on April the 12th, 1945, you would have raised an eyebrow and said, who is Harry Truman? And do you remember the old expression, to err is Truman? Taken from to err is human. I think Kamala is a solid person. She's not uninformed, obviously. I can't tell you what kind of president she'd make. I don't think we ever know what kind of a president will make until they're in the office of the presidency. And as for the vice presidency, as many of you know, I'm considered an expert on the vice presidency of the United States. There is no way to judge whether a vice president will be a successful president. It depends purely on the circumstance in which they find themselves. And again, I use Harry Truman as the example. You just never know. I believe that Biden has already indicated that he is going to run for re-election. Will he be too old? That will be a question the American people will have to resolve. So I can't predict the future, but I can tell you that I've tried to give you a fair analysis now. Don't worry about his cognitive ability. People who I know who see him every day say he's right with it. I can only go by what they say. If there were anything else, I knew anything, I would tell you.
I think when you were here several years ago, you predicted that Donald Trump would not survive his presidency.
And that he would not be reelected to the presidency.
No, I think you even said that he would not make it through his presidency.
Was that for what reason?
The impeachment.
Oh, I knew he was going to be impeached, and you knew he was going to be impeached, but believe me, I had no way the last time I spoke here to talk about what happened on January 6th.
Well, I know that.
And let me be crystal clear about that. January 6th was an assault on American democracy. It was an insurrection. All of the indicators, and I'm looking at this, I hope with complete objectivity, indicate, and I listen to people like Liz Cheney, for whom I have a very high regard, even though I disagree with her politically on virtually everything. There is a real concern about what Donald Trump did and didn't do. And the ultimate witness to that is Mike Pence. I must tell you, as a student of the vice presidency, the minute that a president of the United States puts pressure on a vice president to do something as Donald Trump did to Mike Pence, I'm very concerned, and I think it is a real breach of what a president should do. And let me tell you, I was not a big fan of Dan Quayle. Many of you know I wrote a lot about Dan Quayle during his years. Dan Quayle told Mike Pence, you don't cave to this. And thank God he didn't. And even though we may not agree or disagree on Mike Pence, that was his moment in history. And he will be remembered in history for not caving. So I'm just pointing that out to you. Donald Trump survived, but will he survive the judgment of history? And I hope you will have me back to talk once the January 6th committee report is out. And will there be consequences for Donald Trump? If I were Donald Trump, you know what I'd be worried about right now? Georgia, because there's a tape and it shows him trying to interfere in ballots. That's a violation of Georgia law. If I were in Donald Trump's shoes, I would be very concerned about that. Anyway, that's just my observation. I don't say it as a Democrat or as a Republican. I say it as an observer of American politics. Okay.
Thank you. Otto, your turn.
Hi, good morning. I absolutely find myself in agreement with the assessment of, House divided, and I'm sure that's pretty widely held. The question I have is, the problem's been identified. Has anybody come to you, or do you have any suggestions of your own that might represent a practical solution to at least reuniting the country to the point we were, say, 30 years ago, where people were at least civil and found a way to cooperate?
May I tell you, the answer I'm going to give you is very depressing. I was a liberal Republican. Many of you know I was an officer in the Republican Party. I was president of the Teenage Republicans. I worked for Richard Nixon. I'm the biographer of Harold Stassen. I'm cited in almost every major history of the Republican Party as somebody who was called by Richard Norton Smith, for instance, a scholar of modern republicanism. I have never been more depressed about the lack of viability of the two-party system. The polarization is appalling. Once upon a time, there was a liberal wing of the Republican Party and a conservative wing of the Democratic Party. And those wings no longer exist. And those of you who follow nature know that for a bird to fly, you have to have two wings. You clip a wing, a bird doesn't fly. And the problem is that we now live in a system in which we've clipped the wings. We have essentially put ourselves in the position of not being able to compromise. Let me give you the best example I can, and it's over this abortion question. A leak from the United States Supreme Court. Everybody should condemn it. Somebody had the audacity to say whoever leaked it is a hero. I don't think so, because it violated the confidentiality of the court. But there was another aspect, and that is the issue of abortion itself and the right of woman to choose. I have never in my experience in politics, not since the war in Vietnam, let me go back a little bit, have I seen such divisions, such passions. Last night, someone said to me, well, abortion is murder. It's genocide. And they equated it with the murder of 6 million Jews and more in Europe. I said, if you can't see the difference between camps like Auschwitz, Dachau, Belsen, Buchenwald, that were built with the express purpose of killing people. That's why they were built. The trains went there when they could have taken troops to the front. That was the priority, to kill people. And see a difference between that and the idea of that abortion is genocide. We have a serious problem. There is a gap in this country. Let me give you one other example, if I can. And that is the word insurrection. I use the term insurrection because I know what an insurrection is. I looked it up. And I know that what happened on January 6th was an attempt to overthrow the democratic process in this country. And yet there are people who will not concede that. One of the things I've learned, and one of my areas of expertise is the Middle East, is you can have a whole different lexicon, series of words that describe a situation. Words can be used to describe events and have two completely separate meanings. And so when I say this to you, I do it with some regret. I believe in the American system. As an American political historian, I believe the strength of this country is we've survived many, many crises. And I hope, and I'm going to say this advisedly, that we can find in future leaders people who will bind the country together rather than divide it. How do you straddle the fence on key issues? You really can't. But part of it has to do with belief in personal credibility. One of the things that a lot of people hope Joe Biden would do, which he has not been able to succeed in doing, is by the personality that he had over many, many years as a conciliator. That would be the way to do it. But I invite you to watch the debate that will take place between now and the Supreme Court decision. Listen to the anger, listen to the bitterness, and understand, well, anybody out there been involved in a bad divorce where you see people who once loved each other and then turn on each other? What we're seeing in this country is a nation, but let me give you one other example. I'm sorry. I listen to Tucker Carlson. I don't agree with Tucker Carlson, but I listen to him because in my position, I have to listen to everybody. The comments he makes, he's not a newsman, he's a commentator. The fact that he has the largest listening audience on television of any commentator in the country, when you listen to what he offers, is shocking to me. And if you were sitting in my chair on KGO and you heard people say, but I just heard it on Fox, or I just heard it on CNN, or I just heard it on MSNBC, and I know immediately when they say that what their source is, what their feeling is, what they're grounded in. And I have to tell you, it's profoundly disturbing. I preferred the days of a Walter Cronkite, a Huntley Brinkley, a Howard K. Smith, Peter Jennings. Well, those days are gone. So all I can do as one simple person is try, when I'm on the radio, knowing the large listenership that I have, to try to make it comfortable for everyone while expressing firm opinions. And perhaps the greatest thing I get out of it is the people who say, we disagree with you, but you state it so clearly, and we appreciate the fact that you listen to us. Maybe we need to do a little listening. I hope that's a long answer, and I apologize, but I hope it helps a little bit.
Just to follow up, I take it from your answer that you really haven't seen anybody with a proposal for a pathway to unity again. Is that... No, I haven't. Yeah. And I don't know how you unify over issues like abortion or the woman's right to choose. How do you unify on a question like what happened on January 6th? How do you take that business? Remember, once upon a time, remember how the Democratic Party used to win? It had two wings. It had the liberal progressive wing of the Hubert Humphreys and the Herbert H. Lehmans and the Eleanor Roosevelts. It also had the segregationists, the Strom Thurmonds, the Ernst Holling, all the people in the South. And somehow they made it work because they could come up with a common agenda. Look, being mayor of San Francisco isn't easy, for instance. But the next mayor of San Francisco has to come up with an agenda that people can agree upon. I'll give you one of the best examples I can. The closing of John F. Kennedy Drive. It should be an easy fix for the people of San Francisco. Yet it's become one of the most divisive issues. It's going to be on the ballot. The people who want John F. Kennedy Drive open, particularly people who are disabled, people who are older, are going to go to the ballot. I don't know why we can't come up with a solution. In my house, I live in Laurel Heights. We have a bicycle lane, for God's sake. But we also have a bus. We also have cars. And there ought to be a way to come up with simple solutions. But unfortunately, passions and interest groups become so inflamed that they're not willing to compromise. And then you have members of our own Board of Supervisors who say one thing and vote another way. And I'm not going to name names here, but it's very disturbing. You know what? I wish there were a heck of a lot more courage and a lot less profile.
Oh, okay. I'm going to jump in here. John, thank you so much. I've been taking notes. The test is later, so I'll probably pass. And I'll see you at the Washington Awards banquet.
Actually, I will not be there. Lope is going to fill in for me. Go ahead.
One of the things, I'm originally from Chicago, so I have learned that Chicago does not have the dirtiest politics, reading Seasons of the Witch and being here. But one of the phrases that I've always been a fan of is follow the money, whether it's money funding research, etc. We did have Chesa speak, and then one of our members insisted we have the opponents also speak, and that's fair and balanced. But when I looked at and did a deep dive with Janice on funding and who's funding the recall, I thought that was extremely disturbing. How much of funding is an issue and the dark money and the private money do you think is really influencing some of the situations we're seeing nationally and locally?
Okay, let me just say, it costs a lot of money to run a campaign, whether it's a recall or whether it's running for political office. The days when my old boss, Milton Marks, who many of you knew, could run for political office, to run as he did for the state assembly for the first time, $3,000 was the amount of money he had to spend. When Milton left office, the last time he ran was in 1992. He had to raise $600,000 and he didn't have any real opposition. So to run for political office or to run a campaign is very tough. One of the most impressive things about the school board recall and about the Chesapeake recall is whatever money is put in, the people that are circulating those petitions, the people who feel passionate, they're not getting any money out of it. They're doing what they do. I know that in the recall on the Board of Education, it was volunteers really working their tails off. I think a lot of that money very often goes to political consultants who frankly don't do a hell of a lot. I'm being very honest with you. So there's no way to separate money from politics. Remember what Jess Unruh, blessed memory, used to say. Money is the mother's milk of politics. And I don't know that we can ever have a time when that is not the case. I have seen good candidates for political office who could not get off the ground because they were unable to raise money. And when I talk to people, when London Breed's term expires, people talk about running for mayor, they're all very reluctant because they say, where will we raise the money? The money isn't there. And so it will require a grassroots effort by the people of San Francisco, a genuine reform, if you will, because the corruption in our own city hall, and it extends back over multiple mayors, is so profound, so disturbing. And I can say that because I was mayor of San Francisco in Youth in Government Day in 1966, the best run day in the history of our city. But there is tremendous corruption, and it's something that we as a city have to address. I don't know that we will, but it extends nationally as well. I've talked to people who would like to run for political office, higher political office. How do you do that? When Dianne Feinstein retires from the Senate, assuming she does not run for re-election, and everyone is operating under that assumption, it's going to be a free-for-all, and whoever wins the Democratic primary is certainly going to be the next United States Senator from California. So we're going to see millions spent. Now, in my business, that's great news because it means there'll be advertising on the radio. But I have to tell you, it is something we all need to think about. You can't run for political office today without a lot of money. And that's the simple truth and reality. And one other quick point, that discourages a lot of people because the minute you start accepting money, you start selling yourself to a degree. It doesn't matter whether you're a liberal or a conservative. It doesn't matter what your background is. And a lot of people criticize the Bicycle Coalition here in San Francisco. They're doing exactly what they should do. They have a position, they have a policy, they want to pursue it. And you may agree or disagree with their agenda, but that's the reason they're so effective. And by the way, that's why people in politics in San Francisco don't want to offend them. So it's and it's not said in a pejorative way, it's simply a fact. So this is something we really need to think about in terms of the day will come here in San Francisco when there will be reform candidates, when they will have a different approach, and we'll see how it goes over here in the city.
Say, John, I have a question on the same subject. Have you considered running for office, and what office would that be?
I'm repeatedly asked about the possibility of running for political office. I never rule anything out. My wife has told me at any time I want to jump in, she'll be happy to support me. But I have no announcement to make here. But one never knows, Mike. One has to consider all the possibilities.
Okay, good.
John, I have a question for you. Now, this is a question from one of our members, Lauren Ward, and he asked, would you comment on the similarities between the political climate in Congress in the buildup to the Civil War and today's climate?
In the buildup to the Civil War in Congress, there were physical assaults. It was very, very difficult. Many of you know the story of the caning that took place in the Capitol. Certainly rhetorically, it's difficult. I cannot abide Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'll be very honest with you. The minute she talked about Jewish lasers being responsible for forest fires. But one of the great things about America is you can elect anybody to Congress. The Democrats had a man named John Rankin from Mississippi, from Tupelo, Mississippi, who was one of the biggest bigots that ever walked the halls of Congress. And may I say, the Republicans and the Democrats don't choose their candidates. Candidates run, district by district. How do you discipline people who get out of line? I don't know. But yes, I don't think we're anywhere near where we were pre-Civil War. And I hope we don't get there, because I would really fear for my country. And let me be clear, I believe in the American system. If you get me started on the American system, you can be assured I believe it works. It has to work. We are, no matter what failings we have, we are the hope of the world. And if you listen to President Zelensky, and I use them as an example, or you go to Hungary, for instance, just across from the Parliament building, there is a statue. It's of Ronald Reagan. Now, I never voted for Ronald Reagan for anything. I knew him, mentioned in books about him, but I never voted for him. You know why? Because America represented, and individuals in America represented hope. And I think one of the things that we have to concentrate on is building that sense of hope. It's important to the world. If America fails, the whole world fails. You understand that, right? You do understand. We are the backbone of NATO. I haven't said a word about NATO, but one of my objections to Donald Trump was the fact that he tried to gut NATO. Can you imagine if he'd succeeded, where we would be today? I mean, really and truly, do you understand the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which I would remind you, it was founded by Harry Truman, but the first head of NATO was a Republican, Dwight David Eisenhower, General Eisenhower. NATO is a bipartisan kind of thing. And all I can say is that's one of the things that we will debate when it comes to the Trump legacy. So how do I view America in the context of pre-Civil War? I use the example at the very beginning of popular sovereignty. Your homework assignment is to Google popular sovereignty. And all you have to do if you go to Wikipedia is take a look at the section dealing with pre-Civil War. And you'll understand that deep division, which ultimately was not decided by compromise. It was decided by a civil war. God forbid we should ever find ourselves in that position again.
Thanks, John. We have a question from Katie Liddell. Katie?
Yes, first, John, thank you so much for being with us. I always look forward to hearing from you. Fabulous. So I'm curious to know what your impression is of Chief Bill Scott of the police, and what kind of a job you think he's doing for us.
I've interviewed Bill Scott. I like him personally. I can tell you there are severe problems with law enforcement. One of the things that has to happen is better coordination between the chief of police, the district attorney, the public defender. That is not happening. And I must tell you, if I were mayor of San Francisco, I would insist that it happen. I would insist on meetings between all people involved in law enforcement on a weekly basis. May I tell you, the closing of Walgreens here in San Francisco and the decision not to, well, look, I get calls from all kinds of people. But when you close drugstores because of theft going on, because of the feeling of insecurity, that's not the way to live in a city. It just isn't. So I would suggest, Chief Scott, let me tell you, chiefs of police come and go in San Francisco. I've known them all going back to Tom Cahill. So I've known them all. But there has to be coordination. Remember, we have a weak mayor system here in San Francisco. It's not a strong, powerful mayor. There are things, though, that a mayor can do to help facilitate. And if I were mayor of San Francisco, I would certainly want to see that kind of discussion take place. That's what I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Otto, Otto, did you have a question? Did you get your question answered earlier? Otto? All right, let's move on. Janice Litvin, you have your hand
Beg
raised.
your pardon. Yes, I did get an answer. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Janice?
John, you know, I'm a huge fan of yours. You mentioned a couple of times the issue of truth and facts. Unfortunately, a lot of people hang their hat on their choice of facts, and a key issue that we all know acutely is the issue of the vaccine. There are a lot of people that will quote all kinds of scientific facts that the vaccine was not only not going to work, but that it was an affront to our freedom. There are parents who've never believed in vaccines, and they certainly don't now. So how do you choose which facts to follow?
Well, I just recovered from COVID. I was knocked out, as many of you know who listen to KGO, I was knocked out for 2 weeks. Pat Thurston was knocked out for 2 weeks. Nikki Maduro was knocked out for 2 weeks. Anybody who says the vaccine isn't worth getting, if I hadn't had the vaccine plus the booster, I'd be dead. I have always believed in the vaccine. I've always understood the danger of COVID. I think I was the first person on the radio here in San Francisco, and it was because of Chef Mark Vogel, who had done a job in China and came back with these horrific pictures of people dying in the streets. And I reported it on the air, and people were horrified that I would do that and said, oh, making a mountain out of a molehill. It was no mountain out of a molehill. It's true. We're not over this. We are still confronting this virus. And as many of you know, it's on the upswing here. Now, some people say, well, but people aren't dying in as many numbers as they were. Yes, but we have no idea what the long-term effect is going to be. And I can tell you, I have a lot of people who have had the virus who have a long-term impact. So I take it very seriously. Now, I realize the anti-vaxxers, and I had Robert Kennedy Jr. on my radio program because I wanted people to hear what an anti-vax position was. And then I had my own doctor, Dr. Michael Schrader here in San Francisco, who's president or incoming president of the Medical Society. I wanted people to have a choice and understand, but don't confuse people with the facts. I still have people who say the vaccine doesn't work. I have people who call and say more people have died because of the vaccine than have not died. And I'm listening to this. And sometimes I will confess I get frustrated on the radio. I try not to hang up on people. Many of you know I try to be very reasonable, so forth, and I argue with them. Or I try to present facts, or I try to bring people on who will. May I tell you, one of the most incredible things for me, the other night, an observation was made that Dr. Fauci should be taken out and put up against a wall and shot. And I talked about that, and there were people who agreed with it. And you know, that's the kind of thinking. I don't have an answer for it, but I didn't talk about the virus. We would have been all together today. I would have had a delicious breakfast at your expense had we been able to gather together. So I only want to suggest to you, this is a critical issue. And may I say, when it comes to students, high schools, and colleges, we'll see it. And one more thing, I watched the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I always enjoy that event, and I watched it. And then I thought about the Gridiron Dinner, which I really enjoyed. But look how many people got sick at the Gridiron Dinner. And will we know in the next 3 weeks how many people get sick from being at the White House Correspondents' Dinner? And it doesn't matter really how careful you are. I've been double vaccinated. I've been boosted. I wear my mask. I am very careful. And I got it. And my wife got it. And by the way, we're not part of the statistics that are being reported because we never went to the hospital. We didn't have to. So for particularly people who are older or people who have other issues, secondary issues, don't ignore this. I think this is, you're very correct. May I just say to you, the funniest line at the White House Correspondents' Dinner was the line which said, and look, all the Fox News correspondents are here and they're all vaccinated and boosted. And when you consider the anti-vax approach that was taken on Fox, and I listened to Sean Hannity, you know, I have low blood pressure, just want everybody to know. So in order to get myself going, you know, I have to really, so these are the people who you know, Sean would say, well, I didn't oppose it, but he sure did in his underlying message. And the same thing with Tucker Carlson. So my attitude is there are a lot of issues that we have to confront. And public health is one of them. And we better understand it. And I'm glad you raised the question. I should have addressed it. It's just you guys don't give me enough time.
Hey, speaking of time, I'm looking at the clock. It's 8:49, so we have an opportunity for just a few more questions. Are you good on time yourself, John?
May I tell you, my time is your time. And
Correct answer.
for the Breakfast Club, I have nothing but time, even if there was no breakfast.
This is why we love you. We still have some great questions here.
Is
Bill
Rich
Buchanan-
Correa here, by the way?
Rich is not here today.
Well, you tell him, you ding him for me.
I will.
Rich hasn't been around for a while.
Oh,
He's been
well,
hiding.
I want you to really let him have it. Okay, go ahead. And you can
Okay.
tell Rich I said so.
Yeah. Hey, John, I
Will
have another question for you. You're talking about facts and everything. What do you think about this new alleged Department of Misinformation that the Department of Homeland Security is proposing?
Yeah, I don't think we need another department.
I don't
That's
either.
my answer. I mean, what do I need another department for? Really and truly. But I will tell you what I think there should be, and that is accountability. When somebody goes off the rails, somebody has to call them on it. I don't think it's a government department that ought to do it, but I do think we in the media, and I am in the media, even if I'm not a news person, we have to call them out on it. So that's my answer for you. And we'll see how it evolves. What the president has said is it will be a bipartisan group. All I can tell you is there's no such thing in my mind as a bipartisan group. It's like
Right.
saying the Supreme Court should be bipartisan. Those days are long gone. Sad.
Right.
I like the accountability reply. That was great. Bill Buchanan had a question, and then Betty Taish also. Bill?
Welcome back, John. Bill
Thank you.
Buchanan. I've always enjoyed your presentations to the club, and I enjoy your position in journalism as being, more or less in the center. That's
No. I have an opinion, but the trick is I let everybody express their opinion.
Well, yeah, that's good. And also, your presentations are driven by the facts, which is kind of rare these days. Anyway, I'm reading a book right now. It's by an author. He's a scholar and educator, as you are, and his name is J.D. Hirsch. And the title of the book is How to Educate a Citizen. And the theme of the book is we've drifted away in K-12 and higher education from the approach to education of actually using knowledge base instead of what he calls child base, where it's more or less let the kid figure out the syllabus of the curriculum, and let them go that way. And he cites the lowered and declining educational achievement, scholastic achievement scores. We also know well about, 1619 Project, critical race theory, and that sort of thing, which is creeping into K-12 as well as, higher education. Do you think we have a crisis in that regard in American education?
You expect me to answer that in less than 10 minutes. And I want to tell you, I'm delighted. Look, the first thing we have to do is to have good teachers. Do you know anybody who's planning to become a teacher? I don't know anybody who is going to school to become a teacher. You can't have kids educated in a vacuum. I can tell you all through my years at school, the question of the quality of my education came from the people who were my teachers. If they were good, solid teachers, I learned something. And by the way, I took care of my second grade teacher until she died. And people asked, why would you do a thing like that? Miss Burdette inspired me. I played Benjamin Franklin in the second grade in the play Ben and Me, and it had a huge impact on my life. We need to encourage people to go into teaching. Do teachers have biases? Yes. So I'm going to use as an example the idea that I was on a speech team, and I had a speech coach. Many of you remember Sanford Chandler, Ira Blue's son-in-law. I used to come into the classroom at 6:30 in the morning, and Sandy Chandler would have a newspaper there and he'd give me a topic. And he'd say, talk about it. And I would talk about it. And then in the middle of my impassioned oration, he would clap his hands and he'd say, switch sides. One of the things we have failed to do is to allow students to learn how to be critical thinkers. And I think the only way you do that is by cultivating teachers who understand how important that is. I don't mind the fact that a teacher has a bias. We all have our biases. But I think there is a way to teach without injecting one's personal views. And I can tell you the greatest tribute I can pay to many of my teachers is I didn't know if they were Democrats or Republicans. I only knew that they knew what they were talking about. One other quick point. When I went to high school, and as I say, I went to George Washington High School. I always like to put in a plug for the Washington Eagles. We could not graduate from high school without passing a civics test at the end of the 11th grade. In other words, you couldn't go into the 12th grade without a civics test. The fundamental ignorance of students graduating from high school about how the American system works is a tragedy. And one of the things we need to do is to reinstill into schools, not patriotism per se. I'll give you the best example I can. Last night, somebody called and said, well, you know, it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And of course, they were defining this in the context of the abortion question. I said, wait a minute. That's not the Constitution. That's the Declaration of Independence. And we better understand the difference between a Declaration of Independence and a Constitution. And I hasten to point out, God is not mentioned in the Constitution of the United States. I say this because our own ignorance is passed down generationally. So the most important single thing is finding good people to teach who are open-minded, liberal or conservative. Some of you remember Joel Springer, my old friend Joel Springer, who was to the right of William F. Buckley, but he was a hell of a high school teacher. Of course, he couldn't afford to stay a teacher, so he went to work for the Masons. So all I can tell you is that this is the kind of problem we have too. Affordable salaries are very important. And I know we have a number of real estate people here, so if anyone can find a house here in San Francisco at a reasonable price. Somebody talked about affordable housing and I laughed. That's an oxymoron. Okay.
All right. Yeah, John, thank you. And speaking of real estate agents, Betty Taish has a question, and I believe that's we're running out of time now. So Betty, why don't you go ahead and ask the last question, and we can end the meeting following John's reply.
Okay, John, thank you. That's all I'll say. Couple quick things. COVID is alive and well. There's over 100 cases from a meeting in Sacramento last week. I'm probably one of the few people wearing a mask here in DC. A lot of people sick in DC. So heed that.
3 cheers for you, and you're right.
Yeah. And number 2, I was being at the Capitol yesterday. It was so sad to see the Capitol. I have not been here in 3 years, and because of COVID, and that's all I'll say about the Capitol. We couldn't get close, and I thanked all the security people and so forth.
Can I quickly just add,
Please.
In the old days when I would go to Washington, I spent a lot of time in Washington. You could walk into any Senate office, you could take any elevator, you could go anywhere in the Capitol. You can't do that anymore. And
I remember.
that to me is horrifying.
You have to be escorted
I
in.
agree.
Yeah. So we heard at the Public Policy Committee meeting this morning, Speaker Mo Alethiel is his name. He's with the Georgetown Institute of Politics. And he gave a concept, it's not left and right and how terribly divided. He used the word the big sort that are because of how our population is right now. Instead, he calls it the front and the rear, the front and the back, that there are some people in the front and 95% of our country feels that they're in the back and they cannot move forward. And that nobody, and you use the word listen. Listening is the critical thing. And he actually is a contributing member to Fox, even though he's a Democrat. Doesn't make any difference because he needs to listen as you do to the other side. And he gets all the flack that you do as well. But my question is this: how do you instill in adults and then children, grammar school, the art of listening, even if you don't agree, because you may pick up one little thing that not going to change your opinion, but how you understand the other people's opinions. Getting back to grammar school, civics, and so forth. How do you instill listening in people?
By example.
Mm-hmm.
Kim McAllister, who's at KGO, asked me to speak to her daughter, who was 11 or 10 years old at the time, just before the last presidential election. And everybody said, well, what are you going to say to 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds? It wasn't a problem. I talked to them the same way I talk to you. clearly, precisely, and they had great questions. By the way, the greatest compliment I had was when Kim's daughter, they had 2 tickets to Hamilton, and her daughter said, "I want John Rothman to take me." I couldn't because I was on the air, so Kim took her. But it's by example. You may agree or disagree with me on the radio, and that's good. That's what I'm supposed to do. But I have a reputation most of the time, not all the time. Sometimes I lose my temper, but of being open and willing. And so it's by example. It is exactly what this club has done over many, many years. And I think I've probably been speaking to the Golden Gate Breakfast Club longer than probably any other guest speaker. And I've always done it because you have a variety of opinions, a variety of people. You have people listening to me now who are on the left, people who are on the right. There's only one thing I want when I'm done, and that is for people to say, it was worthwhile. I learned something. Or I may have disagreed with him, but at least he presented it in a reasonable way. That if a question is asked aggressively, that I try to give an aggressive but positive answer. And that's my hope for America. We need to articulate it clearly and precisely in everything we do, no matter what our profession. I'm lucky. I'm in the public limelight. I have the opportunity to speak to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people when I'm on the radio. And I consider it a privilege. And by the way, a sacred responsibility to do the right thing. The same thing, if I ever do run for political office, I can assure you I will view it the same way. So I know I have to conclude, but I want to thank you all. I especially appreciate this forum. I have so many friends here, and I can assure you I will be happy to come back anytime. And perhaps next time it'll include a breakfast, but we'll see. Thank you all very, very much.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, I have a favor to ask you, if it's okay. It's 9 o'clock, so if you guys, anyone needs to leave, you're fine. And I'll stop the recording in just a moment. But I would like to ask John, can you stick around for a few minutes? We've got a few people just with a few more questions.
Yes, and you may continue to record. I have no fear of recording. Go ahead.
Well, in that case, let's go ahead and do that.
But may I say thank you to those who have to depart. I appreciate your patience and I appreciate the invitation.
Okay, thank you. All right, Bert, I see your hands up, and then Seema Lieberman also has her hand up. So Bert, why don't you go ahead, and then Seema,
thank you.
follow Bert.
Hi, John. It's great to see you back.
Thank you.
I've got one that no one's touched yet, which I think is one of the biggest problems that we're facing today, and that's 3 letters, PG and E, if you don't count an ampersand as a letter. The issue, I'll just see what I see it is, PG&E is a fossil company, just like Exxon, just like Chevron. They're what's called an IOU, investor-owned utility, that actually has a government department called the PUC, whose primary role is to make sure that the rates are high enough that PG&E can stay in business and keep the investors investing in the company. So they have conflicts all over the place as well as. So what would you do with PG&E at this point? What are your suggestions?
Let me answer the question. First of all, I'm glad to see you're doing well. I know you recovered from your bicycle accident, and I'm just glad to see that you're in good shape. PG&E and PUC, those are difficult subjects. I must tell you that PG&E is essential to what we do here in California. There's no way to gut PG&E and continue to believe that the power will flow. Now, maybe in a few years, there'll be an alternative to PG&E, but there isn't. But I'll tell you what has to happen. The integration between PG&E and PUC, which is supposed to oversee PG&E, it's so incestuous, it just doesn't work. So my suggestion is, and it's a big problem, is we got to start not with PG&E as a company, but with the Public Utilities Commission. And I think that is one which we could address. I know, and I want to commend my colleague, Pat Thurston, who has had Loretta Lynch on repeatedly. And I say repeatedly, Loretta is there all the time. And her comments on PG&E, if I were in charge, I'd want to get Loretta Lynch deeply involved again in the actual process. But every time you turn on your light, every time you turn on your water, every time you do all of these things, there is a dependency which there's nothing wrong with being dependent, but we have to make sure that it's independent. And the PUC should be independent from PG&E and vice versa. And that's a quick answer, and I apologize for the brevity.
Well, I'm all electric, so I don't have to worry too much about it. I'm actually sending more to PG&E than I did, without. Maybe start with separating PG&E into Pacific Gas and then Pacific Electric.
May I tell you, that's a fascinating question, which I'd be happy to discuss. Let me tell you, I have solar panels on our house. I drive an electric car. I am very conscious of all of these things. I will tell you, when my wife redid our bathroom, she put in one of those bathtubs that you can walk into. She thinks I'm getting old. Come on, give me a break. But I don't use that tub. I don't take that bath because it takes a lot of water. And I'm very much aware of the fact that my lawn right now, and I've got a 3,000 square foot yard, my lawn is going to be brown. And Ellen is not happy about it, but it is our social responsibility. And we are very careful. We don't run our utilities after 6 o'clock at night. We are very judicious in terms of what we do. But that will require all of us, not just me. People ask, how are we going to solve the problem? It's a collective issue. And may I point out, not just an issue for us, it's an issue for the world. Look at China, look at India. I think these are all questions. I must tell you, when I go up to Tahoe, and I haven't been up to Tahoe in a while, the great thing is I don't worry about how long my bath is because there's plenty of water. But these are the things we all have to think about. And may I tell you, our future depends on our doing it. Not the fact that you and I will be here, although Sydney Mobell will be here forever. Sydney, I have great faith in you. But
Yes.
It's our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren that we have to worry about. I want them to have the quality of life that and I want to say this very clearly, that I've been blessed to have. I am conscious every day of how lucky I am in every way.
Well
All right,
said.
thank you.
John, I am
Yes.
sending you this. It is the secret Jewish space laser core. You will get a pin and you will be a member because, of course, you are the best. And I did worry if I nagged you too much. And if you want to know what the benefit of persistence is, it's today and having John here with us. So I'm sorry if I was a nag, but I swear I am here.
You're never a nag, and I promise never to use the space lasers to start forest fires.
Okay, that's good. Seema, you have a question, and then I know Janice, your hand is up too.
Hi.
So
Yeah, I have a quick question because I may not be able to even time for the answer. I'm expecting another call. But my question is this. I agree with you. Well, first, I agree with you 100% about Joe Biden being, having his faculties together, especially after seeing him at the correspondence dinner. He was amazing. But in terms of faculties, you mentioned Dianne Feinstein. What are your thoughts about her? In my opinion, she is losing it. And I don't know what's going to happen with her. So what's your thoughts on her?
My answer is that Diane is not the same Diane that I worked with when she was a member of the Board of Supervisors and Mayor of San Francisco. But she will finish her term, which is what she wants to do. Will the people not benefit from her? She's going to vote the right way, if you will. She has an extremely effective staff. And we all need to be aware that the staff work, even if you're fully compos mentis, the staff work is what really matters. When I was Milton Marks chief of staff, one of the things I learned was that what we did was as important as what the senator did. So Diane has my love, my affection, and I will tell you right now, she will be acknowledged for what she has been. And we will just have to see how it all plays out. She's not going to run again, that's for sure. But there's nothing we can do. She's sworn in, she's taken the oath. There's no one to remove her. And so she will continue to serve in the United States Senate. As I say, the Democrats that you talk to in Washington, and I do talk to people on the Hill, the most important thing is she votes the right way. Her vote is cast. The day she can't get to the Senate chamber to vote. May I just tell you a quick story? Do you all remember Claire Engel? who was the United States Senator from California. And Claire had a brain tumor. And in 1964, when the Civil Rights Bill was up, Claire Engel couldn't speak anymore. He was wheeled into the United States Senate, and you had to say aye or nay. What did Claire Engel do when it came to his vote? He pointed to his eye. So voting is critical, and Diane is right there.
Oh, that was a great story. Focus to your eye.
That's exactly what Claire Engel did. And you may recall he died in office, and Governor Pat Brown appointed Pierre Salinger to take his seat, and then Pierre was defeated in the election of '64 by George Murphy.
Thank you. Janice?
Hi, John. I'm Joseph Litvin, Janice's husband.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm confused. Can you help me understand Israel, their relationship with Russia, Ukraine?
Yes.
What's going on there?
The answer is that the Israelis have tried to mediate. Naftali Bennett, who, by the way, has roots here in San Francisco. He went to Lowell High School. His parents went to Lowell High School. They were married at Temple Emmanuel. They've tried to mediate. The Israelis are caught in a real problem. First of all, Russia has troops in Syria. They don't want to antagonize the Russians. Number two, there are more than 1 million former Russians who live in Israel. They're now Israeli citizens. Many of them are Ukrainians. Many of them are straight old Russians. It's a serious problem for the Israelis. To their credit, the Israelis have made sure that they have been helpful to the Ukrainians in terms of defense. They have provided aid and support. But Israel is not a major power. They're trying to do the right thing. And yes, they are steering a less effective foot. Now, let me just tell you one thing. This happened the other night. Many of you heard me talk about it for a couple of hours on the air. Lavrov, the foreign minister, said Hitler had Jewish blood. So the first thing I ask is, does anybody know what Jewish blood is? By the way, anybody go to get a transfusion at a blood bank? Anybody ask whether your donor is black or white, male or female? You ask anything, there's no such thing as Jewish blood. It was one of those things which should have been denounced immediately. And Lavrov and Putin continue a tradition, which I have to tell you, unfortunately, has not been friendly to Jews. I was president of the Bay Area Council for Soviet Jews for many, many years. I led the demonstrations in front of the old Soviet consulate on Green Street. I was never against Russia per se, but I do think we have to expose injustice, and there is no more unjust, irrational leader in the world today of import than Vladimir Putin. And I think we all understand that. So my answer is Israel is doing what it has to do. At the same time, why do you think Zelensky spoke to the Israeli parliament, to the Knesset? Because Ukraine is grateful for all the aid that Israel is giving, and God bless them for doing it.